My name is Daniel Cross, and I still remember the exact second my life seemed to collapse right in front of me. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't fate. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded decision by someone who thought they had the right to erase me. The conference room was too bright that morning, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insects above our heads, and the silence of my co-workers pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. 20 people in neat rows, laptops open, pens clicking nervously, waiting for my supervisor to begin her address. Her name was Victoria Hale. She wasn't just a supervisor, she was a presence. Tall, polished, immaculately dressed, with eyes that seemed to measure everything and everyone as if they were entries in a ledger. To her, people were numbers, charts, expendable resources. To me, she was the gatekeeper of my career, the woman who controlled whether my year of sacrifice was recognized or discarded. When she called my name, I felt a flicker of pride. I thought this was it. This was the moment she would acknowledge what I had built, an intricate web of client relationships, carefully nurtured, each one representing trust, loyalty, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. A year's worth of work, thousands of hours poured into remembering birthdays, comforting clients when their parents died, celebrating when their children graduated. It wasn't in the job description, but it was in my heart. And for the first time in months, I believed that maybe, just maybe, she saw it too. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room, "would you please display your audit?" I obeyed, my hands trembling slightly as I connected my laptop to the screen. The document bloomed across the projector, 50 pages of meticulous records, proof that genuine human connection wasn't just kindness, it was profit, growth, stability. I thought I was about to receive validation. Instead, I was about to watch my professional identity burn. Victoria's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This," she announced, pointing at the glowing document, "is precisely what we must never do again." Laughter didn't erupt, but something worse did. A ripple of discomfort, a wave of shifting bodies and averted gazes as my co-workers realized what was happening. She scrolled through my notes as if they were embarrassing diary entries. Personal conversations about pets, about family illnesses, about anniversaries. This is not professional. This is weakness disguised as work. My throat tightened. Each word landed like a hammer against my chest. I wanted to defend myself, to shout that the clients loved me, that revenue had surged, that retention rates were higher than ever. But before I could speak, she did something that will be seared into my memory until the day I die. She hovered over the delete button. "Garbage," she said, her voice cold as steel. And with one click, a year of my life vanished. I stood frozen, my hands numb against the edge of the desk, while 20 pairs of eyes tried not to look at me. It felt like my own funeral, except no one offered condolences. No one dared. And then, like some cruel joke, the universe rang my phone. My pocket buzzed while my work lay in digital ashes. I almost ignored it, but something in me needed to hear a voice that wasn't hers. "Mr. Cross," the caller said when I answered. "We've been following your work. We'd like to make you an offer. $500,000 a year plus equity if you're interested." $500,000. In that moment of humiliation, that moment when Victoria thought she had ended me, I realized she had just handed me the most beautiful weapon of all, the chance to let her bury herself with her own arrogance. I didn't smile then. Not yet, but a spark lit inside me, the kind of spark that turns humiliation into fire, fire into vengeance, vengeance into destiny. This was only the beginning. I wish I could tell you that Victoria's betrayal was the first time I had felt my worth ripped out from under me, but the truth is, it wasn't. Long before she humiliated me in that conference room, I had already been branded by another betrayal, one that cut deeper because it came from someone I once loved. Years earlier, I was engaged. Her name was Lauren, and she was everything to me. At least I thought she was. We met in college, sitting side by side in an American history lecture, and while everyone else scribbled notes half asleep, she leaned over and whispered some sarcastic remark that made me laugh harder than I should have in a silent hall. That was how it started, innocently, like most tragedies do. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had built my entire future around her. The ring on her finger, the apartment we furnished together, the dreams we whispered about late at night when the world was asleep. But betrayal never announces itself with a trumpet. It creeps in like a shadow at dusk. I remember the first clue, her phone lighting up with messages she refused to explain. The late nights at study groups that left her smelling like cologne I didn't own. And finally, the night I walked in on her in our living room, lips pressed against another man's while our wedding invitations sat in neat piles on the coffee table. The sound of paper ripping when I dropped the box of invitations still echoes in my nightmares. That was the moment I learned humiliation doesn't have to be public to feel like it's carving you apart. Sometimes it's worse when it happens in your own home, where you thought you were safe. I left that night with nothing but a duffel bag and the knowledge that I had been discarded like a bad draft of someone's story. And here's the cruelest part. I blamed myself. I thought maybe if I had been more attentive, more successful, more something, she would have stayed. That belief ate at me for years, shaping the way I moved through life, the way I measured my own worth against the approval of others. So when Victoria stood before our department and called my work garbage, the wound wasn't new. It was reopened. It was Lauren's betrayal dressed in corporate clothing. It was the same message, repeated, "You are not enough." And that, perhaps, is why the phone call that came after Victoria deleted my files didn't just feel like an opportunity, it felt like salvation. $500,000 wasn't just money. It was proof that someone out there saw value in me, value that had been denied by the people who should have known better. But before I could step into that salvation, I had to relive the sting of humiliation all over again. Because life, I've learned, doesn't hand you revenge on a silver platter. It forces you to crawl through broken glass first until your knees are raw and your hands are bleeding. The betrayal by Lauren taught me something important, though I didn't see it at the time. People who dismiss you, who humiliate you, who throw away what you've built, they always think they're invincible. They believe their cruelty will be forgotten, buried under your silence. What they never expect is that silence has a way of fermenting into resolve. When Victoria destroyed my audit, she didn't erase my work. She resurrected the part of me that Lauren had once killed, the part that refuses to be discarded, that refuses to be silenced. And this time, I wasn't just going to survive it. I was going to make sure the world watched when the powerful collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. This was no longer just about a job. It was about every betrayal I had endured, every time I had been told I wasn't enough, every time someone mistook kindness for weakness. And for the first time in years, I felt the fire of revenge warming my blood. The faces of power in my life weren't strangers. They were people I saw every single day. At Peton Consulting, power wore tailored suits and carried clipboards, and it dictated who thrived and who vanished without explanation. Victoria Hale sat at the top of that pyramid. She was my direct supervisor, and to the outside world, she was the embodiment of corporate success. Sharp, composed, always 2 steps ahead. But underneath the polished surface was something colder, an obsession with control so consuming that anyone who didn't fit into her grid of numbers and metrics became expendable. To her, empathy was inefficiency, relationships were distractions, humanity was weakness. But Victoria didn't operate alone, power never does. She had her loyal lieutenants, the kind of co-workers who smiled to your face and sharpened knives behind your back. There was Blake Turner, the golden boy of our department. He came from money, dressed like he was born in a Brooks Brothers catalog, and had a way of making every conversation about himself. He wasn't cruel in the obvious way, he was cruel in the way of silence. When Victoria mocked me, he didn't laugh, but he also didn't stop her. He sat back, lips pressed in a polite smirk, as if watching my humiliation was simply another form of entertainment. Then there was Carla Simmons, the quiet one who wrote everything down. She wasn't malicious, but she was dangerous in her passivity. People like Carla never take sides, they just follow the wind. And when the wind blew in Victoria's direction, Carla's silence became another weapon against me. But the faces of power weren't only at work, they were also in my family. My father, William Cross, had spent his life believing success was measured by job titles and salary numbers. Respect comes from achievement, Daniel, he used to say, and achievement means results, not feelings. He had worked 30 years in manufacturing, clocking in and clocking out, never missing a day, never questioning orders. To him, my role in client relations was fluff, glorified customer service, he called it once, dismissing what I did before I could even defend myself. My mother Karen loved me, but she absorbed his worldview. She worried constantly about my stability, about whether I was making the right choices, about whether I'd ever have the kind of security my father revered. And though she never said it outright, I could feel the doubt in her eyes every time I talked about my passion for building relationships with clients. It wasn't just Victoria who dismissed me, it was my family too. To them, connection was nice, but it didn't pay the bills. Numbers mattered. Results mattered. Not the invisible glue of loyalty and trust that I spent every day cultivating. Even my younger brother, Aaron, had a way of making me feel like a failure without ever saying the words. He was a surgeon, the pride of the family, saving lives and earning respect everywhere he went. At family dinners, conversations always seemed to orbit around him, his achievements, his grueling hours at the hospital. When it was my turn to speak, my words felt smaller, my accomplishments trivial in comparison. So when Victoria called my work garbage and pressed delete, the pain wasn't just professional, it was personal. It echoed every doubt my father had ever cast, every silence from my brother, every nervous glance from my mother. It was as if the world had conspired to remind me that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I cared, I would never measure up. But here's the irony of power. It blinds the people who hold it. Victoria, Blake, even my father, they believed they were unshakable, untouchable. What they didn't understand was that in dismissing me, they had built the very stage on which their downfall would play out. They had given me the fire, the fury, and the freedom to turn their certainty into ashes. At that time, I didn't yet know how their collapse would happen, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. When it came, I would make sure they saw it with their own eyes. Rock bottom doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in like a fog, thickening until you can no longer see your way forward. For me, it arrived in the weeks after Victoria deleted my audit. The humiliation of that meeting didn't end when I left the conference room. It followed me into every hallway, every elevator ride, every quiet moment at my desk. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, not in cruelty, but in something worse, pity. They didn't have to say a word. The subtle glances, the awkward silences when I entered a conversation, the way people quickly looked back at their screens if I caught them staring, all of it screamed the same message. Daniel Cross was finished. At first, I tried to shake it off. I buried myself in what little work Victoria hadn't stripped from me. I answered emails, scheduled client calls, and even reached out to a few of the people I had built strong bonds with. But something had shifted. Without the audit, without the official documentation, I had no proof to shield myself. When I spoke up in meetings, my ideas were dismissed. When I asked for updates on client accounts, I was told it wasn't my concern anymore. Victoria had effectively erased not just my work, but my authority. The final blow came one Friday evening when I stayed late, hoping to salvage some dignity by organizing the department's records. As I worked, I overheard two co-workers near the printer. They didn't realize I was still there. Honestly, one of them whispered, "I'm surprised he hasn't quit yet." After what Victoria did, I'd never show my face here again. The other chuckled softly. He probably has nowhere else to go. Guys like him always think their little personal touch matters. But in the end, it's just wasted time. That's why he'll never make it past this level. Their words sliced deeper than they could imagine. I sat frozen, staring at the glow of my computer screen, while shame pooled in my chest. They saw me the way Lauren once had, disposable, replaceable, forgettable. That night, I went home to my empty apartment and sat in the dark. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant honk of city traffic. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, then another and another, trying to drown the echo of their words. By the time the bottle was half empty, I was staring at my reflection in the black screen of my TV, wondering how I had ended up here. A man who gave everything to his work only to be reduced to nothing. For a moment, I thought about walking away, not just from Peyton, but from everything. The thought terrified me even as it soothed me. To disappear, to let the world carry on without me, it felt like the only way to end the pain. But then, in the middle of that suffocating silence, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Vernon Hutchins, one of my oldest clients. "Hey Daniel, just wanted to say thanks again for checking in about Molly last month. She's doing better, running around the yard again. Don't know what we'd do without her." Molly was his golden retriever. The detail hit me like a spark in the dark. He remembered me remembering. He valued that I cared. And in that moment, something shifted. I realized rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the foundation. From here, I could build again. Stronger, sharper, wiser. Victoria thought she had destroyed me. My co-workers thought I was done. My family thought I'd never measure up. But as I sat there with Vernon's message glowing on my phone, I understood something vital. The people who mattered still believed in me. The clients who trusted me, the relationships I had built, they were real. They couldn't be deleted. That was the night I stopped thinking like a victim. That was the night I decided that if they wanted me to disappear, I would do the opposite. I would rise. And when I did, they would all regret ever doubting me. The night Vernon texted me about his dog was the night I began to crawl out of the ashes. It didn't happen with fireworks or grand declarations. It happened with a whisper in my own head. "You're not done, not yet." The next morning, I woke up hungover, exhausted, but with a spark I hadn't felt in months. I pulled out a notebook, the same one I had abandoned after Victoria destroyed my audit, and I began writing again. Not reports, not efficiency metrics, but ideas. Ideas about what I had learned, what I believed, what no one could erase. The first line I wrote was simple: relationships are stronger than spreadsheets. It sounds almost cliche now, but in that moment, it was oxygen. Every example from my past year spilled onto the page: Vernon's dog, Constance's company anniversary, Brick's bookstore expansion. These weren't anecdotes. They were proof that people stayed loyal to those who made them feel seen. For weeks, I poured everything into that notebook. During the day, I still played the obedient employee, smiling through meetings, nodding at Victoria's lectures, pretending to be the diminished version of myself she wanted. But at night, I was building something new. I read books on negotiation, on psychology, on the future of business consulting. I enrolled quietly in an online certification program to strengthen my credentials. I reached out discreetly to contacts outside of Peaton, not to poach or scheme, but to listen, to learn, to widen my understanding of what was possible. And slowly, I began transforming, physically too. I forced myself back into a routine: early morning runs, healthier meals, cutting back on the late-night drinks that had once dulled the pain. With every mile I ran, I shed a layer of self-doubt. With every chapter I read, I sharpened the blade that Victoria had thought she dulled forever. But the real transformation wasn't visible, it was internal. I learned the most important truth of my life. Revenge isn't about hurting someone else, it's about proving to yourself that their cruelty no longer defines you. Still, I knew there had to be a reckoning. Victoria couldn't simply walk away unscathed after erasing my work. My family couldn't go on thinking I was the lesser son. My co-workers couldn't keep whispering about my downfall while pretending they respected me. So I began preparing in silence. I didn't tell anyone about the consulting firm that had called me that day. They had repeated their offer more than once, and though I didn't accept immediately, I kept the door open. I wanted to be ready, not desperate. Instead, I laid the groundwork. I studied Peaton's clients the way Victoria never did, understanding not just their contracts, but their values, their fears, their dreams. I began mapping out in my notebook how each one might react if given the choice between transactional efficiency and genuine connection. It wasn't about stealing clients, it was about recognizing who truly valued me and who would follow me when the time came. In those quiet nights, I also began reflecting on Lauren, on the wound she had left years earlier. For the first time, I saw her betrayal differently. She hadn't left because I wasn't enough. She had left because she couldn't see my worth. And in that realization, I felt a strange kind of freedom. If she had stayed, maybe I never would have discovered how resilient I could be. Maybe I needed her betrayal to prepare me for this one. The more I thought about it, the more I realized every cruelty in my life had been a stepping stone, every humiliation had been a lesson, every dismissal had been fuel. Victoria believed she had silenced me. What she didn't know was that she had given me the time and the reason to transform into someone unstoppable. And I made a vow right there, staring at the pages of my notebook. When I rose again, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be the kind of rise no one could ignore. I would return stronger, smarter, sharper. I would walk back into their world not as the man they thought they erased, but as the storm they never saw coming. And when the reckoning arrived, it would be on my terms. I didn't announce my return. That would have ruined everything. If revenge is about power, then the greatest power lies in silence, letting the world underestimate you until it's too late. So I came back quietly, not with fanfare, not with speeches, but with precision. The consulting firm that had first reached out, Blackwood and Monroe, had been patient with me. They respected that I wasn't going to leap blindly just because Victoria had humiliated me. But after months of preparation, I was ready. I signed the contract in a dimly lit office across Town, pen scratching across the page like a declaration of war, $500,000 salary, equity stake, full authority to build a client relations division in my image. I walked out into the cool night air, not just employed, but armed. I didn't resign from Peyton immediately. That would have been too simple. Instead, I began working in secret with my new team while still showing up at my old desk. I would sit through Victoria's monotonous speeches about efficiency while knowing that across town, a growing firm was waiting for me to steer it into the future. The dual life was exhausting, but it was intoxicating too. At Peyton, I played the obedient soldier. I nodded when spoken to. I completed the meaningless busy work she assigned me. I let her believe she had broken me. Every day, I watched her strut through the office, smug and self-satisfied, convinced that she had restored order. She had no idea that the very foundation beneath her feet was already beginning to crack. And it was cracking because of me. You see, the relationships she thought she deleted, they were alive. Vernon still called me, not Peyton, when he needed advice. Constance sent me emails just to catch up, always ending with, "I hope we get to work together again someday." Brick invited me to his bookstore anniversary celebration, thanking me for believing in his dream. They weren't clients anymore, they were allies, and all it took was patience. The turning point came one afternoon when I visited Blackwood and Monroe's modest office, tucked inside a renovated brick warehouse by the river. My new colleagues greeted me not with suspicion or rivalry, but with excitement. They saw me as a leader, not a burden. They asked questions, they listened. They wanted me to teach them how to build connections the way I had at Peyton, and for the first time in years, I felt what it was like to be valued. That night, I walked past Peyton's headquarters, towering glass, cold steel, glowing logos, and I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. The fortress they thought was unshakable had already been breached. Their biggest clients were watching me, waiting for the right moment. All I had to do was stand still, and they would come to me. But my return wasn't only professional, it was personal too. My father still thought I was wasting my time. At Sunday dinners, he asked Aaron about surgeries, about long hours, about the lives he saved. When the spotlight turned to me, he would ask politely, "So, how's work?" and then shift back to my brother before I even answered. I didn't argue with him. I didn't try to explain. Instead, I let him believe I was still at Peyton, still invisible. Let him think I was drifting. Because when the truth came out, when he saw the scale of what I had built, the shock on his face would be the sweetest vindication of all. Revenge is most powerful when it arrives unannounced, and so I returned in secret, building a new empire while walking the halls of the old one. Every handshake, every smile, every quiet moment of endurance was another brick in the foundation of my revenge. Victoria thought she had ended my story. She didn't realize she had just given me the perfect second act, and when the curtain finally rose, she would be the last to know what was coming. The day of confrontation began like any other, which is why it was perfect. Ordinary mornings lull tyrants into complacency. They never expect the storm when the sky looks clear. Victoria strode into the office with her usual precision, heels clicking on the polished floor, latte in one hand, clipboard in the other. She gathered us into the conference room for another of her infamous briefings about efficiency protocols. Everyone filed in with the same dull expressions, resigned to endure an hour of empty words. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't there as the humiliated employee she thought she'd broken. I was there as the man holding a truth sharp enough to slice her entire empire apart. I sat near the end of the table, notebook open, pen in hand, pretending to take notes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder from Blackwood and Monroe. Contract signed, press release scheduled for noon. In just 2 hours, the world would know I had joined a rival firm at a senior level. By the end of the day, everyone in that room would realize the ground beneath them had shifted forever. Victoria began her lecture, pointing to charts that meant nothing and criticizing sloppy communication habits. Her voice droned on, but I barely heard it. I was watching her face, memorizing the way her confidence radiated like armor. I knew how fragile that armor really was. Then she turned her gaze on me. "Daniel, you've been quiet. Do you have any thoughts on the new guidelines?" The room stilled. 20 pairs of eyes flicked toward me. In the past, I would have mumbled something safe, something to avoid further humiliation, but not today. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I have something to share." A faint smirk crossed her lips. "By all means." I closed my notebook slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch until even the hum of the air conditioning seemed louder. Then I looked her dead in the eye. "I resign." The word landed like a stone thrown into still water, rippling across the room. Gasps, shifting chairs, pens dropping. Victoria blinked, stunned for the first time since I'd known her. "You... what?" "I resign," I repeated louder this time, effective immediately. She straightened, her armor cracking. "That's not how this works, Daniel. You can't just..." But I cut her off, pulling my phone from my pocket and placing it on the table. On the screen was the Blackwood and Monroe press release, already drafted, already scheduled. My name was bold at the top. Daniel Cross, Director of Client Relations. Her voice faltered. "This is impulsive. You'll regret this." "No," I said. "You'll regret it." The words weren't shouted. They were quiet but heavy, like the weight of inevitability. I could see her pulse quicken at her neck, her carefully composed mask beginning to crumble. Around the table, my colleagues exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispers buzzing like electricity. And then, for the first time, I allowed myself to tell the truth out loud. "You thought deleting my work would erase me? You thought humiliation would silence me? But you were wrong. The relationships I built weren't in spreadsheets, they were in people. And those people have already chosen who they'll trust. Not you. Me." Victoria tried to recover, her voice sharp. "This is unprofessional. You're abandoning your responsibilities." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "No, Victoria, I'm abandoning you. And when this company starts crumbling, remember, it won't be because I left. It'll be because you destroyed the only thing holding it together." The room was silent. No one dared breathe too loudly. Even Blake, always smug, looked pale. Carla stared at her notes as if they might shield her. Victoria opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. For once, she had no script, no clever dismissal, just silence. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately. Each motion deliberate enough to leave an imprint. When I reached the door, I turned back one last time. "This isn't revenge," I said softly. "It's consequence." And then I walked out, leaving her to stew in the collapse she had built with her own hands. At noon, the press release detonated with the quiet violence of a well-placed charge. Phones began chiming through the office like a bell tower out of sync. Alerts, emails, notifications piling on top of each other. I was 3 blocks away by then, standing on the pedestrian bridge over the river, watching the water riffle around the pilings, feeling the kind of stillness you only get after choosing a door and stepping through it. Blackwood and Monroe had posted the announcement exactly on time. Director of Client Relations, Equity Partner Track, mandate to build a human-centered practice model. My name in a bold font I had never seen beside it. In the reflection on my screen, the river turned my face into a wavering silhouette. I didn't smile, not yet. The avalanche was only beginning. The first call wasn't from a client, it was from Carla. "Daniel," she breathed. as if she had sprinted up a staircase. "You need to know? They're freaking out. Victoria called an emergency stand-up. Gideon, the CEO, is on the way down. And listen, I did something. I recorded the meeting where she deleted your audit." For a second, the river's noise fell away. "You what?" "I was taking notes on my phone like always," she said. "And when she started tearing you apart, I hit record. I didn't know why, something in me knew it was wrong. I thought I'd delete it. I couldn't. I sent the file to HR and to Gideon. The breath I'd been holding slipped out of me like a confession. I hadn't asked for proof. I hadn't hunted for it. The truth had documented itself. You're not the only one I called," she added, voice shaking. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet that day. That's on me. But I'm not staying quiet anymore." I didn't say the first words that came to me. "You were dangerous in your passivity," because she wasn't passive. Now. "Thank you," I said instead. "Whatever happens next, thank you." The second call was from my father. I almost let it go to voicemail. For years, he'd been the chorus behind every doubt. Respect comes from achievement, not feelings. But I answered, because I knew what was coming needed to be heard with both ears. "Danny," he said, using the name he only employed when he wasn't performing, "your mother just sent me an article. Says you're some kind of director." The word landed awkwardly in his mouth like he wasn't sure it fit me. "Is this real?" "It is." Silence stretched. I could hear the squeak of his chair at the plant, the clank of something heavy set down nearby. "I didn't understand what you did," he said finally, each word like a wrench turned with care. I thought you were wasting time talking. I was wrong. I'm sorry." Civilized shock is a thing you can feel through a phone line. It's a jolt without the scream, a quake under tile floors. My father didn't cry, he didn't gush. He just admitted what he had never admitted in his life, that he had mismeasured a man. It hit me harder than any applause ever could. "I'm going to make you proud," I said, surprising myself with how much I still wanted that. "But I'm going to do it my way." "You already did." He cleared his throat. "Come by Sunday. I'll grill. We'll talk." When the third call came, it was Gideon himself. "Daniel," he said, skirting formality, "can you come back to the office for 20 minutes? Not as an employee, as a witness." I pictured Victoria at the head of the long table, chin lifted, eyes steady, refusing to yield even as the walls bowed. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "I didn't think you were," Gideon replied. "But there are things you should hear with your own ears." I walked back through the lobby I'd crossed 1,000 times and took the elevator up, the numbers lighting in a sequence that felt like a countdown. When the doors opened, the atmosphere had changed. The hush wasn't routine, it was stage fright. In the conference room, the entire department sat stiff as portrait subjects. Victoria was there, immaculate as ever. But a new crack ran through her composure. Gideon stood at the end of the table, sleeves rolled to the forearms as if he planned to roll up truth and lay it flat. "Thank you for coming," he said. He nodded to the compliance officer, a woman with a calm face and eyes that missed nothing. She tapped a key and Carla's audio filled the room. It was all there. My name, the word garbage, the click. The involuntary little gasp I hadn't realized I'd made when the screen went black. The scrape of someone's chair as they shifted away from me. When the recording ended, no one spoke. That, too, was a kind of confession. Gideon turned to Victoria. "We're conducting a forensics review. Art confirms the deletion violated retention policy and was executed without approval. We'll complete the process before we take action." He paused. "But I won't pretend this isn't bad." Victoria didn't flinch. She clasped her hands as if she were about to offer grace before a meal. We were hemorrhaging efficiency, she said evenly. I acted to correct a dangerous culture of boundary erosion. The metrics don't lie. Blake, who had always known how to look expensive without paying for it, suddenly found his courage on the floor where his R's had dropped. Maybe the metrics didn't measure what mattered, he muttered. It wasn't loud, but in that room it was thunder. Gideon let the silence do its slow, surgical work. Then he faced me. There's another truth we discovered this morning, he said. Would you like to share it? Or shall I? I knew what he meant. I had spent the last 2 years writing under a pen name, a weekly essay about the future of client work, how loyalty is built, how trust is measured, the physics of attention in an age of noise. The column had grown, passed hand to hand among executives, until I watched my own words show up, anonymized and quoted in slide decks around the industry. It had been my secret oxygen, the place I could say what I couldn't say at my desk. I'm Rowan Lane, I said into the stillness, the writer of The Quiet Ledger. A collective intake of breath lifted the room by an inch. Even Victoria's gaze flickered. She knew the column. They all did. Last month, a firm twice our size had cited it while announcing a pivot toward relational intelligence. Employees here had joked that it must be written by a think tank. No one had guessed it was written from a one-bedroom apartment on the east side by the man Victoria had disciplined for excessive small talk. The audit you deleted, I continued, voiced steady, was the applied version of everything I've been writing. Not feelings, not fluff, architecture. You mistook warmth for weakness. You mistook silence for assent. You mistook speed for quality. And now you're going to mistake regret for repair. Something changed in Victoria's posture then. Not a collapse, not a surrender, but the smallest drift toward doubt. The damage, for a second, registered behind her eyes like a forecast she didn't want to believe. I didn't know, she said. 3 words. No apology, not yet. But the metal softened. Gideon spoke again. We've received 6 emails in the last hour from major clients. They asked whether Daniel's departure affects their service quality. 2 have requested immediate conversations about their contracts. 1 has already served notice. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Victoria. Blake raised his head like a man surfacing. He stopped, swallowed. I was part of this, he said, voice thin. I talked her into pushing efficiency at the retreat. I liked how it made my numbers look. I'm sorry. Daniel. He winced like the words were cutting his mouth on the way out. I'm sorry I stood there. It didn't heal anything, but regret, when true, has a sound to it. His had that sound. In another life, I would have laughed at the theatre of it. In this one, I let it register and pass. Carla didn't speak. She just met my eyes across the table and held them. It was the first time I had ever seen her not look down. I could have said more. I could have itemized the ways their decisions had bled us dry. Instead, I did the merciful thing, the kind of mercy that feels like shock because it refuses to draw more blood. I'm not here to watch anyone fail, I said. I'm here so that when the choices come, no one can say they didn't know what they were choosing. A tremor ran through the room, a civilized shock again, the polite quake that leaves everything standing but nothing unshaken. Gideon nodded, a small bow that belonged to a different era. Thank you, he said. We'll be in touch. When I reached the door, Victoria spoke at last, the words catching as if they had thorns. Daniel. I turned. I thought I was protecting the company, she said. It wasn't a defense. It sounded like a woman trying to explain herself to a mirror that wouldn't accept her reflection. I didn't understand this. "This is people," I said. "It always was." Her eyes shone not with tears, but with the burn of a truth accepted too late. "If there is anything left I can do to undo the damage, you can stop pretending that care and excellence are opposites," I said gently. "You can start there." In the elevator down, my phone lit up with messages from clients, Vernon, Constance, Brick, each one written in voices that felt like handshakes. I didn't need to ask for their business. They weren't giving me contracts. They were giving me trust back with interest. When the doors opened to the lobby, my father texted a second time. I read it as I stepped out into the light. "Proud of you." I was wrong. It was a benediction written in the grammar of a man who believed apologies were reserved for caskets. I tucked the phone away and finally allowed myself to smile. Not because I had one, but because the truth once revealed had done what truth always does when it's given room. It rearranged the room. The reckoning was not a single explosion, it was a series of tremors that refused to stop. In the days after my resignation and the press release, Peaton Consulting transformed into a theatre of regret, each act more desperate than the last. The first wave came from the clients. Vernon called me 2 days later, his voice warm but edged with anger. "Danielle, I've been with Peaton for 8 years. Not once did they remember Molly's health the way you did. When I called to discuss my renewal, Victoria brushed me off in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I told her I'd rather pay double to work with someone who actually listens. Send me the paperwork." Then Constance called. "I was ready to sign a new 3-year contract," she said, her tone clipped but steady. "But when I asked about you, Victoria said, he wasn't aligned with our standards. Do you know how that felt? Like she dismissed me too. I don't want to be aligned with standards that erase people." By the end of the week, Blackwood and Monroe's modest office was vibrating with new accounts. Not because I hunted them, but because loyalty, once betrayed, does not linger. The second wave came from inside Peaton. Blake Turner, the golden boy, showed up at my new office unannounced. He wasn't polished this time. His tie hung crooked, his eyes bloodshot, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "I thought she was invincible," he admitted, sinking into a chair across from me. "I thought siding with her would protect me. But it's all collapsing, Daniel. Clients are leaving, the board is furious, and Gideon, he won't even look me in the eye. I should have stood up for you that day. Instead, I smirked. God, I still remember your face when she pressed delete." I let the silence hang. Sometimes silence is harsher than condemnation. Finally, I said, "You can't undo what you did, but you can decide who you're going to be now." He nodded, shame heavy in his eyes. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say it out loud. Then he left, shoulders bowed under the weight of a regret that would follow him longer than any of his promotions ever had. The third wave was my family. At Sunday dinner, my father didn't ask Aaron about surgeries first. He asked me about Blackwood and Monroe. "Your mother showed me the article," he said. "Clients following you, industry calling you the architect of a new model. Daniel, I misjudged you." His fork clinked against the plate as he set it down. I thought strength meant stoicism. I didn't understand it could also mean care. "I'm sorry." I had waited my whole life for those words. Not triumph, not validation, just acknowledgement. "You don't need to be sorry," I told him. "You just need to see me." "I do," he said. And for once I believed him. But the most shocking reckoning came from Victoria herself. It was 2 weeks after I left. I was walking to my car late in the evening when I heard my name called across the lot. I turned, and there she was. No clipboard, no armor. Just a woman standing alone under a parking light, her shadow stretched thin against the asphalt. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was different now, stripped of its practiced sharpness. I wanted to say I was wrong. I froze. The woman who had humiliated me, who had deleted my work, who had called it garbage in front of everyone, was apologizing. I thought I was protecting standards, she continued, her words halting. I didn't understand that what you built was the standard we should have had all along. And now, she looked down, her jaw tightening. Now it's too late. Clients are leaving, the board is circling, and every day I feel the walls closing in. I did this. I know I did. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I could have lashed out. I could have listed every wound she gave me. But all I said was, the cruelest part of revenge is realizing it wasn't me who destroyed you. It was you. Her eyes glistened, though she fought to keep them steady. I'll carry that for the rest of my life, she whispered. And in that instant, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but pity. Because true reckoning isn't just about punishment, it's about truth finding its way to the surface, no matter how much someone tries to bury it. Victoria walked away that night smaller than I had ever seen her, not because I diminished her, but because the truth had. By the end of the month, Peyton had lost 60% of its revenue. The board forced a merger, jobs were cut, and Victoria's name quietly disappeared from the company directory. And me? I was no longer the man at the mercy of other people's power. I was the storm they hadn't prepared for. 2 years have passed since the day Victoria pressed delete and thought she erased me. Sometimes, when I replay it in my head, I still hear the sharp click of the mouse, the silence that followed, and the heat rising in my chest. But now, that memory no longer burns. It fuels. Blackwood and Monroe is no longer modest. We've doubled our offices, expanded into 3 cities, and our client base has tripled. The relationships I nurtured became the foundation of something bigger than I ever imagined. And yes, the title on my door now reads Senior Partner. But what matters more than any title is what that title represents. Proof that humanity and business are not opposites, they are inseparable. Clients don't remember how fast you processed their invoices. They remember if you asked about their child's graduation. They don't remember whether a call lasted 15 or 45 minutes. They remember if you listened. They don't stay because of efficiency charts. They stay because they feel seen. That is what Victoria never understood, and what the entire industry is finally beginning to learn. Peyton Analytics, the fortress of glass and steel that once made me feel small, is gone. Absorbed into a larger firm, stripped of its name, a shell of what it once was. Gideon tried to call me once, months after the merger, to offer me a strategic partnership opportunity. I listened politely, and then I said the words that sealed it for me. The time for partnership was when you watched her destroy me and said nothing. I haven't heard from him since. As for Victoria, I learned through the grapevine that she struggled to find a comparable position. Her reputation followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Some say she's consulting independently now, trying to preach efficiency to companies that no longer want to hear it. When I think of her, I don't feel hate. I feel a quiet sadness, the kind you feel when you watch someone drown in a pool they dug for themselves. And my family? My father no longer calls my work glorified customer service. At our last dinner, he raised a glass and said, "To Daniel, who proved us all wrong." My mother smiled with tears in her eyes, and even Aaron, the surgeon, clinked his glass against mine without the old condescension. For the first time, I wasn't the lesser son. I was simply myself, and that was enough. But the greatest lesson of all came not from success, not from money, not from recognition. It came from the quiet moments, when a client calls just to share good news, when a colleague thanks me for listening, when I remember someone's birthday and they look at me as if they matter. That is the real revenge. Not destruction, not humiliation, but building something so undeniably true that no one can erase it. Revenge stories often end with the villain punished, the hero vindicated. But in my story, the sweetest revenge wasn't Victoria's downfall, it was my rise. The fact that she thought she was deleting inefficiency when she was really deleting the only thing keeping her company alive, that was her undoing. All I had to do was step aside and let the natural consequences play out. The best revenge I've learned is not cruelty, it's clarity. It's living in a way that makes every betrayal look like a stepping stone, every insult like fuel, every humiliation like the spark before the fire. And every morning now, when I walk into our bustling office filled with voices, laughter, and the hum of connection, I remind myself, this is what she tried to erase. This is what no one can ever take away. So if you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, dismissed, know this. You don't need to plot elaborate revenge. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply becoming undeniable. Because when people try to bury you, and you rise anyway, stronger than before, the silence that follows is the sound of them realizing they were wrong. That silence is everything.